questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
My questions to the Prime Minister. What is the total cost of corporate tax cuts over 10 years from the 1st of July 2018, both legislated and proposed to be legislated by the government?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The medium-term cost of the tax cuts which was given was $65 billion, and that included the small and medium. That's the small and medium company tax cuts. Now, what the honourable members opposite have done.
The Prime Minister resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition on.
It's on direct relevance. Perhaps the Prime Minister didn't hear it. We said the cost of the
Leader
corporate.
of the Opposition resume his seat. Members on my right are preventing me hearing the point of order. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
On direct relevance, the question I asked was the cost of the corporate tax cuts for 10 years from the 1st of July 2018.
The Prime Minister has the call.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Treasurer advises that the cost of the unlegislated tax relief for business is $35 billion, and the cost in the final year that is outside of the medium-term figures for which were given at the last budget is just under $10 billion. But, Mr. Speaker, what the Labor Party is demonstrating in its questions and the reference to an $80 billion figure, to which they've simply added $15 billion to $65 billion, has no financial basis. But what they've indicated is that their plan is to repeal all of the legislated tax cuts for Australian business. What they want to do is not simply oppose the unlegislated tax cuts for larger businesses, but repeal the tax cuts for Australian-owned, family-owned businesses up to $50 million turnover, which employ 6.8 million Australians. And so that's what Labor wants to do, undermine the investment, the optimism, the entrepreneurship that is driving the record jobs growth. We've seen 415,000 jobs last year, the record jobs growth, the strong economy that is enabling us to deliver the outcomes for Australian families. 10 million Australians will receive tax relief from the Treasurer's budget, and we will move to a personal income tax system that is simpler and fairer. And, Mr. Speaker, all of that is only enabled by a strong economy, and the Labor Party wants to pull the rug out from under that Australian economy, that stronger economy, by abandoning Australian family-owned small and medium businesses, as every question they've raised indicates.
The member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister outline to the House how this government's plan for a stronger economy is helping to create jobs, reduce taxes and fund the essential services on which Australians rely?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. Last night, the Treasurer handed down the budget, a plan, an economic plan, a commitment to the values, the plan we took to the last election in 2016. It is a plan that delivers on those commitments to drive a stronger economy, to support Australian business, to support Australian jobs, and tax relief for small and medium businesses employing more than 6 million Australians, record investment in hospital and schools, more affordable childcare, more affordable medicines, so many of those medicines life-saving medicines. The roads and rail to get Australians home sooner and safer and bust congestion, and of course all of the resources that our vital services need: schools, education, health, the PBS, Medicare, all enabled by a stronger economy with more jobs. Mr. Speaker, as I said in my previous answer, we cannot forget that last year we saw record jobs growth, the most jobs created in Australia in our history, and we're continuing to see 1,000 jobs added every single day. Now, none of that's happened by accident. The opposition would have us believe that Australia has grown simply because the global economy has. Mr Speaker, we have made our own luck. Australians have made their own luck. Remember, in 2011, 2012, when Labor was in government, when global economic growth was stronger than it is today, when commodity prices were much higher than they are today, Labor trashed the budget with one bigger deficit after another because of their addiction to spending. The fact is, Mr Speaker, you need to have the policies that enable you to take advantage of a stronger global economy, and that's what we have put in place. It means we can guarantee the services Australians rely on. It means we can return the budget to balance sooner. And, Mr Speaker, what that means is we will not be throwing a growing mountain of debt onto the shoulders of our children and grandchildren. Net debt peaks this year as a share of GDP, turning the corner on debt. Labor sent us down a dangerous road on debt, and we have now turned back in the right direction to ensure that we bring the budget back into balance and bring that mountain of debt down. Mr Speaker, the budget the Treasurer delivered last night delivers tax relief for working Australians so they can keep more of the money they earn, their money. An average income earner will have $530 in their pocket from next year. For a family, 2 parents, 2 income earners, that's over $1,000. That is a great support for that family.
The member for McMahon has the
Thanks
call.
very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Following last year's budget, when asked what is the total cost of the corporate tax cuts from 1 July 2017, both legislated and proposed to be legislated by the government, the Treasurer answered $65.4 billion. So I ask, 1 year on, what is the total cost of the corporate tax cuts over 10 years from 1 July 2018, both legislated and proposed to be legislated by the government?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'll repeat what the Prime Minister said. The medium-term cost of the unlegislated component of the enterprise tax plan, which is currently before the Senate, is $35.6 billion over the period from 2016-17 to 27-28. Now, that is the measure that is currently before the Senate. Now, the last year of that 27-28 program is $9.8 billion, which obviously includes the cost of that measure as it applies economy-wide. And so I'll let the Shadow Treasurer add up if he can. But the point is this. The point is this, Mr Speaker, is that the costings I have just set out is for the unlegislated tax cuts. Now, they would know that once a measure is legislated, it's legislated. So it begs this question, Mr Speaker. It begs this question as to why they want to know. Why would you want to know the cost of tax legislation that has already been legislated for small and medium-sized businesses unless you wanted to reverse it? Unless you wanted to rip away the tax cuts given for small and medium-sized businesses in this country? Well, I'll tell you, $25 billion is the cost to revenue of what those legislated tax cuts go for small and medium-sized businesses over 10 years. And you will be out $25 billion, $25 billion unless you reverse those tax cuts in your plan. Because you went to the last election and you said you were going to, beating your chest over there, the great man from McMahon, he was going to reverse the whole enterprise tax plan. Now, you be honest with the small businesses, through you, Mr Speaker, and you tell them, are you going to rip away their tax cuts that have been legislated by this parliament, or are you going to strip them away?
The member for Forrest.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline to the House how the government is sticking to its plan for a stronger economy? How does a stronger economy benefit all Australians, including in my electorate of Forrest?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Forrest for her question, and I commend her on her excellent advocacy for the Bunbury Outer Ring Road. Fantastic job. to the member for Forrest standing up for her electorate to ensure important critical infrastructure that is funded by a stronger economy and a government that knows how to live within its means the Bunbury Outer Ring Road will get built thanks to the member for Forrest, Mr Speaker. And the budget I handed last night is a plan for a stronger economy. A stronger economy, the economy Australians will live in the next 10 years, is what will determine their choices, their opportunities, Mr Speaker. And it is important that we go into this next decade with a budget that's back in balance, Mr Speaker, a budget that has turned the corner on debt, a budget that has taxes under control and has spending under control. It's important that there is a strong plan to ensure a stronger economy for Australia, and that's what this budget is about. You can't pay and you cannot support and guarantee essential services that Australians rely on unless you're doing the hard work of building a stronger economy, which the businesses of this country are doing, which the employees of this country are doing, and which the Turnbull government is doing, Mr Speaker, to provide for that stronger economy. And that plan that I announced last night, the Turnbull government's plan for a stronger economy, is to provide tax relief, to encourage and reward hard-working Australians and reduce the cost pressures on households. It is to continue backing business to invest and create more jobs. As the Australian Bureau of Statistics has demonstrated and found in their records, more than 1,000 jobs a day created during the past year, creating more opportunities for people to go from welfare and into work. The best form of welfare is a job, Mr Speaker. We are guaranteeing the essential services that Australians rely on: Medicare, hospitals, schools, caring for older Australians, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, the Turnbull government's stamp of guarantee, because it's a stamp of guarantee of a stronger economy, which those opposite wouldn't know the first thing about, Mr Speaker. It's a plan to keep Australians safe. And it's only a coalition government, it's only a Liberal and National government who knows how and has the demonstrated track record of keeping Australians safe, of stopping the boats and keeping them stopped, Mr Speaker, on hunting down criminals, Mr Speaker, of stopping terrorism and preventing the terrorist threat to this country, under the keen stewardship of the Minister for Home Affairs, keeping Australians safe, and the Minister for Defence ensuring that our overseas forces get the support they need. And above all, this side of the House, the Liberal and National parties, know how to live within our means, keeping taxes under control and keeping spending under control, Mr Speaker. We all know on that side of the House too much tax is never enough for them, Mr Speaker. Their taxes can never keep up with their reckless spending.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. When the Treasurer answered the exact same question last year, why is the Treasurer refusing to tell Australians how much his corporate tax cuts cost over the
Deputy Leader of the
next 10
Opposition
years?
just pause for a second. Deputy Leader of the Opposition just perhaps stay at the dispatch box, because the Minister for Urban Infrastructure was interjecting, and he interjects in a particularly piercing tone. I'll ask him to cease interjecting. And can I ask the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to begin the question again? The clock will start again.
Thank you.
Members on both sides. If members can cease interjecting, we can get on with their question time.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. When the Treasurer answered the exact same question last year, why is the Treasurer refusing to tell Australians how much his corporate tax cuts cost over the next 10 years? So I ask, what is the total cost of corporate tax cuts over 10 years from the 1st of July 2018, both legislated and proposed to be legislated by the government?
Hear, hear.
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for her keen interest in the economic matters, which has had a great track record in this place. She's always been very keenly interested in the economy, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I will repeat for the House. It's fairly straightforward.
The member for Kingston.
The final year cost in 27-28 of those measures is $9.8 billion. And, Mr Speaker, let me provide you with some additional information. In the 2017-18 budget, the major bank levy was proposed to raise around $1.8 billion in 2023-24 and cumulatively around $10 billion to 2023-24. Now, that is when all companies—
The
I'm talking
Manager
about
of
tax.
Opposition Business will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business.
On direct relevance, it is impossible for questions to be more specific than when they ask for one number. We're now up to the third question seeking the same number, and I ask the Treasurer to be relevant to the one number the parliament's asking him about.
Just before I call the Treasurer, I will rule on the point of order. Members on my left will cease interjecting. I'm trying to rule on the point of order. This was a specific question relating to company tax, and with a very tight preamble, I think raising the bank levy is an unrelated matter, and the Treasurer needs to confine himself to the subject of the question.
Speaker, but before the point of order was taken, the point I was about to make about the bank levy was how banks are major companies in this country who pay corporate tax, and by the time that the major banks in this country would receive a corporate tax rate of 25%, they will have paid in the bank levy more than $16 billion in bank levy back to the government, Mr Speaker. But the figure look, get your calculator out, get a pen, write it down, and I'll help you with the maths. You add $9.8 billion to the cost. It's that simple. I know maths isn't your strong suit, and there's no one on that side who can help you with it. Just add 9.8. It's pretty simple.
The member for Jagga is warned, as is the member for Lindsay and the member for Lyons. The member for Indi.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, as you know, my community has benefited from 38 new towers under the mobile phone black spot program, and you tell us that the government's role is to develop a long-term plan. My question is, what is the long-term plan to deliver mobile phone coverage to regional Australia? Unfortunately, the budget overlooks the challenge of mobile connectivity in regional areas. There's no commitment for future rounds of the mobile phone black spot program. So, Prime Minister, what is your message to the 200+ communities in Indi and the rest of regional Australia that will be forced to go without this essential service?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable member for the acknowledgement she's made of the very effective deployment of new base stations in her electorate addressing mobile phone black spots. Mr Speaker, the government understands very keenly the importance of mobile coverage in regional and remote areas, and that's why we've delivered $220 million to fix those black spots. And I'd remind the honourable member and other honourable members that despite being in government for 6 years, the Labor Party did not spend a single dollar on improving mobile coverage. Not $1 in 6 years. Now, Mr Speaker, a total of 502 base stations have been completed across rounds 1 and 2 already, with more stations under construction and on the way. I'm pleased to advise the House that the outcomes of round 3 were announced last month, and so that will see the delivery of an additional 102 new mobile base stations. Now, the honourable member is thrilled that her electorate of Indi has been a big beneficiary of the program, with 26 towers completed across the electorate and 12 more on the way. That's over $8 million in federal government investment and a total investment in her electorate in these towers of $34 million. Now, Mr Speaker, I can also advise the House that the Regional Telecommunications Review has been brought forward, and the Minister has asked them to hand down their recommendations to the government before the end of the year. The outcomes of the review will show how regional communications looks in the future. It will provide direction on where we need to focus our efforts to ensure contemporary communications in regional and rural Australia. So we're committed to fixing the mobile black spots. I want to congratulate the ministers, Senator McKenzie and Senator Fifield, for their strong leadership in delivering more towers and more coverage right across the country.
The member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. will the Treasurer outline to the House how the government will provide tax relief to encourage and reward working Australians, including in my electorate of Dunkley?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Dunkley for his question, and I commend the member for Dunkley on his success in advocating for the electrification of the Frankston to Baxter line. Congratulations. A tireless worker for his community, Mr Speaker, ensuring in this budget essential infrastructure which is supported by a stronger economy, congestion-busting infrastructure going in Victoria is supporting these important projects, which the member for Corangamite, I no doubt, would also be pleased to see those projects, as she does the Avalon Airport, which we've also announced in the budget. Now, in this budget, we have announced real tax relief for Australian families and working people in this country who pay taxes. We have done that through a 7-year plan, that is affordable, that is costed, and that provides genuine certainty for Australians to know what economy they'll be working in over the next 10 years and the tax that they will pay, and more importantly, when they put in the extra effort, and go the extra yard, they will be able to keep the proceeds of their extra effort. Now, that plan involves, in its first step, delivering to middle and low-income earners up to $530 every single year as part of their additional tax refund, and that $530, and if it's a dual-income family on average incomes, that's more than $1,000. And what that means for a family in that circumstances, that's half your year's electricity bill, that's filling the tank on about 10 occasions, that's paying for the school kids' books and uniforms, that's doing all of these things, Mr Speaker. Now, there are some who snigger at it on the other side. They snigger at it, they demean it. The member for Sydney particularly was sniggering at it the other day, Mr Speaker. She must be really in touch with Australians who are working out there, Mr Speaker, when she thinks $530 is just to discard it and means nothing to working Australian families in this country, Mr Speaker. But that's the tax relief that we're delivering as a government, because we understand it's important that they get that relief now, Mr Speaker. Those out there of the almond latte set, Mr Speaker, they don't think it matters. They just rip into their smashed avocados and say it doesn't matter, Mr Speaker, on that side of the House. But on this side of the House, we know it matters. We know it matters, and that's why we've provided for it in this budget. But on top of that, Mr Speaker, we are acting to remove the impact of bracket creep over that 7-year tax plan and simplify the tax system in this country, which will mean 94% of working Australians paying taxes in this country will face a marginal tax rate of no higher than 32.5 cents in the dollar. Mr Speaker, that plan needs to be legislated. The Labor Party will find any excuse not to give Australians tax relief. We'll look for every opportunity to give them that relief.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. My questions to the Prime Minister. In the first 15 minutes of this question time, the Prime Minister, the Treasurer and the Minister for Finance in the Senate have all refused to say the single total cost of corporate tax cuts over 10 years from the 1st of July 2018, both legislated and proposed to be legislated by the government. So, Prime Minister, what is the total cumulative number? Specifically, what is the total cost of corporate tax cuts over 10 years from the 1st of July 2018, both legislated and proposed to be legislated by the government?
The Leader of the Opposition's time has concluded. The Prime Minister has the call.
The honourable member for his question. I refer him to the earlier answer. The medium-term cost of the unlegislated component of the enterprise tax plan, which is currently before the Senate, is $35.6 billion over the period from 2016-17 to 27-28, and in 27-28 the projected cost of that unlegislated component is around $9.8 billion.
The member for Ford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and my question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline to the House how the government's economic plan for a stronger economy will guarantee essential services for all Australians?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Ford for his question, and I commend him on the work he's done to ensure the M1 upgrade on the Gold Coast, Mr Speaker, along with his colleagues up on the Gold Coast, the Ministers of Trade here, And the member for Paddon up here, Mr Speaker, I congratulate him on his advocacy on that, and also ensuring that those working in the Australian film industry, the gaffers and everyone else who's out there who has a job in the Australian film industry, will be supporting by the increased support that has been provided by the Turnbull government to ensure that there is a solid pipeline of work right across the Australian film industry, and we'll see those big films coming to Australia, which, as the Trade Minister knows, also supports tourism in this country very, very significantly. Now, Mr Speaker, a stronger economy guarantees the essential services that Australians rely on. And a key essential services that we're provided for in this budget is to ensure that we preserve and increase the choices and the dignity and the respect that Australians can have as they grow older. And in this package, Mr Speaker, that we announced last night, we announced an additional 14,000 places for in-home care in this country. They are high-level needs care places. That's on top of the 6,000 we announced in December. That's 20,000 additional places just this year to address the significant choice that more and more Australians want to make to be able to age in their own home with their families. The member for Chisholm was reminding me today that particularly for many families, particularly from an ethnic background, it matters so much to them that they can keep Nonna in their home with them as they're celebrating Christmas or as they're celebrating Easter or Greek Easter on that matter. Mr Speaker, it's so important that Australians have that choice, and this will mean that there will be an increase of over 80% on the 2017-18 numbers over the forward estimates in the proportion of those high-level care places, Mr Speaker, and that is something that old Australians should have that choice protected for them, and we've done that in this budget. 74,000 high-level home care places will be available, and that is an increase of 86% on 2017-18. There's $83 million for increased support for mental health services and residential aged care facilities. And we're backing choices of Australians like Lucky Steve I was talking about today at the Press Club, Mr Speaker, who's out there wanting to work, knows he needs to work, and he's taking responsibility for his life as he always had. He doesn't growl, he doesn't whinge, he just gets onto it, Mr Speaker, and he just provides for himself and his family. And for him, we've ensured that we've got an extension of the pension work bonus, we've got an extension of the pension loan scheme, Mr Speaker, we've got the wage subsidy for older Australians, and particularly for self-employed older Australians, Mr Speaker, who now get that benefit of the pension work bonus up to $7,800 a year. We're supporting old Australians, their choices, so they can age with dignity and with respect.
The Leader of the Opposition.
My questions to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, is the total cost of corporate tax cuts over 10 years from the 1st of July 2018, both legislated and proposed to be legislated by this government, is it more than or less than $100 billion?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, this matter has been addressed several times now. The honourable member, by the year 27-28, the full enterprise tax plan, were it all to be legislated, will have been in full operation for 2 years. So asking what company tax receipts will be 10 years from now is effectively asking what will be the profitability of the corporate sector 10 years from now. The medium-term estimates have been provided.
Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? The member for Swan.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline to the House the importance of having guardrails on the amount of government tax and spending? What are the consequences of higher tax accompanied by higher spending?
Good question.
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Swan for his question. There is no stronger advocate or no person in this place who has a better understanding of what it takes for small businesses to succeed than the member for Swan. And he'll be as pleased as I think as small businesses all around the country that the instant asset write-off has been extended for a further year. That successful program begun many years ago, Mr Speaker, under this government, to ensure that small businesses can invest in their businesses and grow their businesses. And this is an important part of a tax approach that this government has taken, which says it's The money that is paid to the government in tax is paid by taxpayers. That's who pays the tax. Now they say opposite, really, as if they seem to understand this, Mr. Speaker. So why is it they call, when we give tax cuts to business, a giveaway? What are we exactly giving away? It's their own money, you muppet. It's their own money, Mr. Speaker. We've got another one here. Through you, Mr. Speaker. I apologise.
No. The Treasurer is using certainly undesirable language, and I think, in terms of the demeanour of the House, there are many on my right that don't like it when it comes back at them. So
thank you, Mr. Speaker.
It would be easier if the Treasurer didn't use that term.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, the point we're making, which those opposite should listen carefully to, is when you provide companies or indeed personal income tax relief, all you're doing is you're allowing people who earn that money to keep it. It's not the government's money. It belongs to those who earned it, and that's what we believe on this side of the House. And on that side of the House, they think they own everything in your pocket, and they think they have an entitlement to collect it all, and what they're good enough to let you keep, you should be thankful for, Mr. Speaker. Well, that's not what the Liberal and National parties believe. That's what the Labor Party believe. That's why they refuse to be constrained on their taxes. We know that the Shadow Treasurer, when he became the Shadow Treasurer, many years ago, back in 2013, went grandly to the Press Club and said the key test for this government is that they don't allow taxes to rise above 23.7%. Now, he has backflipped on that like he's backflipped on everything he believes in, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to be of someone of interest in economic policy. If there's a wind blowing outside, Mr. Speaker, the Shadow Treasurer better not go outside, because he'll be changing his mind in a heartbeat, Mr. Speaker, because he can never keep to any position. You have to keep guardrails on your tax and on your spending. At 23.9%, Mr. Speaker, when you go above that, that's too much tax. We believe too much tax is too much tax, that it suffocates the economy. What the Labor Party is going to do is put a tax burden on the Australian economy of over $200 billion, Mr. Speaker. That is like a snake eating itself from the tail, and that's the image they should put on the front of their tax plan, Mr. Speaker, because that's what they will do to the Australian economy if they ever get the chance.
Just before I call the member for McMahon, I'd like to advise the House that present in the gallery this afternoon is a delegation from Samoa, accompanied by the Samoan High Commissioner. On behalf of members, I extend a very warm welcome. The member for McMahon.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. The budget includes a 7-year personal income tax scheme. The budget papers outline 3 separate steps of the scheme, and the government this morning introduced legislation to implement all 3 steps of this scheme. Will the Treasurer immediately release the separate cost of each step of its personal income tax scheme?
The Treasurer has the call.
The cost of the plan over 10 years is $140 billion.
Okay, no one's. Next question. The member for McMahon.
Give us the cue on the stages. It's cute.
Because they didn't.
No one jumped. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
No one jumped. The member for McMahon then jumped first. I waited for about 10 seconds. The member for McMahon has the call.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister release the separate costs of each step of the government's 7-year income tax plan?
Go on now.
The Prime Minister has the call.
And thank the honourable member for his question. And the Treasurer has answered that question very, very well. But, Mr. Speaker, the question that the member for McMahon and his leader can't answer is what is going to happen to the Australian economy and thousands of jobs if they were able to manage their tax plan, which is putting up taxes on businesses, on families, on trusts, grabbing the cash out of retirees'
Prime
savings.
Minister will resume his seat. The Prime Minister will resume his seat. Prime Minister has indicated he's concluded his answer. The member for Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Small and Family Business.
Member for Bonner will just pause for a second. Members on my left will cease interjecting. The member for Bonner will begin his question again.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Small and Family Business, the Workplace and Deregulation. Will the Minister inform the House about how the government is building a stronger economy by backing businesses to invest and create more jobs? Why is it important that the government stick to this plan?
The Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Bonner for his question. I look forward to joining him on Friday to meet with many small and family business operators in his electorate. Mr Speaker, we have a plan. This side, and the Treasurer has been speaking about it uphill and down Dale, as is the Prime Minister. He delivered it at this dispatch box last night, the latest edition, an update to it, a plan for a stronger economy where we create more jobs. Businesses create more jobs, and that allows us to support more essential services for hard-working Australians. And, Mr Speaker, I was looking back at the plan opposite. In the last financial year that the Labor government, the Rudd-Gillard government, ran this economy, there were a net 61,000 decrease in businesses in this country, irrespective of size. Under the Turnbull Coalition government's plan, updated, as I said last night, by the Treasurer, in the last financial year there has been, just in small and family business land, keeping in mind that 61,000 for Labor was across business irrespective of size, just in small and family businesses, 65,000 new businesses have started. That's why it's important that we legislate tax relief for small and family businesses, some 3.3 million of them, Mr Speaker. Why? Because they employ 6.8 million hard-working Australians. This is where you get the 1,000 jobs a day, from this plan. This is how you enable, you empower businesses, people that are prepared to take on bank debt, back themselves and employ people, something those opposite would know nothing about. They are prepared to put their families home on the line, get out there and employ hard-working Australians.
The Minister will just pause for a second. The member for Moreton is warned. The member for Lindsay's been warned. She can leave under 94A, and the Minister can resume his answer.
What's the risk to the plan, Mr Speaker? The risk to the plan is a change in government. Why? And we heard this while we were away. We now know about some of the harsh things that may happen on a change of government. What we don't know is about the secret deal that the Leader of the Opposition has with unions and his union mates, most notably, and at least half the front bench, according to the Australian, are concerned because they don't know what's in it. They don't know what's in it, and they should be concerned. They should be concerned. Why? Would you trust the Leader of the Opposition to go into a room and argue for a wage increase on your behalf, Mr Speaker? That's the question that we'll be asking between now and the next election. The Leader of the Opposition's secret plan with his union mates, most notably the CFMEU, will put a wrecking ball through this economy, putting at risk everything that has been gained by the business community, irrespective of size, over not just the past 12 months, the past 5 years. Our plan's about improving opportunities for all Australians, reducing pressure on households and providing more certainty when it comes to providing the essential services they have come to expect.
The member for McMahon.
Much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. This morning the Treasurer introduced legislation to implement the government's entire 7-year personal income tax scheme. Already today at the National Press Club, the Treasurer refused to say what the year-by-year cost of the scheme would be. So, Treasurer, will you tell the Parliament what is the year-by-year cost of the government's personal income tax scheme over those 7 years?
The Treasurer has the call.
Mr Speaker, the Shadow Treasurer would be well aware of the process for putting together budgets. He was once a Treasurer. It wasn't for very long, and we're going to work very hard on this side of the House to ensure he doesn't get that opportunity again, Mr Speaker, because of the lack of understanding that he is demonstrating in this place about how budgets are put together. I've made it very clear that the cost of that measure over the medium term is $140 billion, Mr Speaker. So you have the opportunity to support tax relief for Australians or walk away. You want to take any excuse not to support tax relief, you'll take it, the Shadow Treasurer, because the Shadow Treasurer wants a blank cheque on tax, Mr Speaker, for one simple reason.
The Shadow Treasurer can't stand up to the Leader of the Opposition. He can't stand up to the Deputy Leader of Opposition. He can't stand up to this whole mob here, Mr Speaker, who want to spend money like there's no tomorrow. He wants a blank cheque on tax, and the Australian people should never get it. He says, what about the cost? Don't forget, it's their money. It doesn't cost us. It costs them to pay tax. We think they should keep what they earn. You want to take it all through you, Mr Speaker. That's what he wants to do. $220 billion of higher taxes on the economy, and he's just getting started.
The member for Petrie.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Revenue and Financial Services. Will the minister please outline to the House how the government is protecting superannuation of Australian workers?
The Minister for Revenue and Financial Services.
I thank the member for Petrie for his question, and I note how hard he works on behalf of all of his constituents and what a great advocate he is. The government does recognise how important it is to ensure that Australians' retirement savings are protected from undue fees and charges. Why? Because 9.5% of people's wages today are deferred into the future for their retirement income, and the government has a responsibility to protect this money. As part of the budget that we announced last night, the government will be introducing a sweeping package of reforms to help safeguard the superannuation of millions of Australians. We are capping the fees on low balance accounts below $6,000. That will return around $570 million to people's retirement accounts. We are banning exit fees on all accounts. That will return $52 million to retirement accounts. We are improving the insurance arrangements to allow young members and those with inactive or low balance accounts to choose whether or not they want cover. That is up to $3 billion returned to people's retirement accounts. And for the first time, we are giving the Australian Taxation Office the powers to reunite people proactively with their superannuation, their lost or inactive superannuation. This will mean, in the first year alone, $6 billion going back in to the retirement accounts of millions of Australians. Now, these changes will take place and take effect on the 1st of July 2019, and it will mean that people have more money in their retirement accounts. And this is particularly important for young Australians. It will help them to build up their nest egg at the most important stage as they are building their careers. It will mean, for a median income earning 26-year-old with multiple accounts, that they could save $5,300 in fees and premiums over the first 10 years, which will increase their balance at retirement by around $50,000. This is real money in people's accounts. It is because on this side of the chamber we recognise that superannuation money is members' money. It belongs to them. It should be reunited with them. Those on this side, just like they do with taxes, think that the money belongs to them or to vested interests within the superannuation movement. Now, the Leader of the Opposition has an opportunity. He has an opportunity on Thursday night to back these reforms, because it was under the Leader of the Opposition, when he was Minister for Financial Services, that he mucked this up. He let it be a free-for-all on fees. He put young people into superannuation, and we are fixing his mess.
The minister's time has concluded. The member for McMahon.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Treasurer, what is the year-by-year cost of the budget's 7-year personal income tax scheme over those 7 years?
The Treasurer has the call.
To page 33 of Budget Paper 2, which sets out the normal process for costing measures, which is $13.4 billion over the forward estimates, and as I've indicated, the full cost over the 10 years is $140 billion. Now, he asks about year-on-year costs beyond the forward estimates. Now, I find that passing strange, to use a term of a former Prime Minister from that side of the House, because Labor's retiree tax provides no year-by-year estimates beyond the forward estimates. They provide a 10-year estimate, which is not 100% clear, I've got to say, because it's not clear that they've actually factored in the fact that if we've got a 1-point ceiling $1.6 billion transfer balance cap, which means those with higher balances will be able to use more credits. But, Mr Speaker, I find it interesting that, as usual, he's prepared to apply one rule to himself and a different rule to others. What I know about the Labor retiree tax is it's a kick in the guts to retirees, Mr Speaker, and what I said last night is this side of the House will not go pilfering the tax refunds of pensioners and self-funded retirees because we think they should be respected and the Labor Party thinks they should be taxed.
The member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Revenue and Financial Services. Will the minister update the House on how the government is ensuring the integrity of the tax system? How does a fair tax system aid the delivery of essential services?
The Minister for Revenue and Financial Services.
I thank the very excellent member for Boothby, and I appreciate her question. The Turnbull government is determined to make sure that everyone pays the right amount of tax, so that we can continue to ensure that we guarantee the essential services that Australians, millions of Australians, rely on. We believe on this side of the chamber in the integrity of the taxation system. On that side of the chamber, they simply believe in higher taxes. We have improved the integrity of the tax system by creating some of the strongest multinational anti-avoidance laws in the world. We have also introduced the diverted profits tax and the multinational anti-avoidance tax, and that has seen an additional $7 billion of sales returned each year to the Australian tax base. We have established the Tax Avoidance Task Force, which has resulted in the Australian Taxation Office raising $5 billion in liabilities from large corporations and multinationals across the last 18 months or so, and we are building on this success in this budget by introducing further measures to ensure that businesses are paying the right amount of tax. In particular, we are shining a light on those people who might be ripping off their fellow Australians through the black economy. And I'd like to congratulate Michael Andrew, who led the Black Economy Task Force review, for the important work that he has done. We are cracking down on the illicit tobacco market and preventing the flow of funds to organised crime syndicates by establishing the Illicit Tobacco Task Force. We are introducing a $10,000 cash payment limit to crack down on money laundering by criminal syndicates and gangs, and we are protecting honest Australians by being ripped off from those who are trying to cheat on their tax or get a discount by letting someone else cheat on their tax. While the Turnbull government has taken this strong action and introduced tough new laws, Labor in government, I am sad to say, did virtually nothing to combat tax avoiders when in government, and they voted against our multinational anti-avoidance laws, and they were against our country-by-country reporting regime. And of course, if that wasn't bad enough, Labor now wants to hit aspirational Australians with a tsunami of more than $220 billion of higher or new taxes. Higher taxes on companies, on investments, higher taxes on savings and on superannuation, higher taxes on family businesses. And let us not forget the $56 billion retiree cash grab, which, despite all of their laughable guarantees, hurts pensioners and low-income earners. The choice could not be clearer. We're for integrity of the tax system, they're for higher tax.
The member for McMahon.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. This morning the Treasurer introduced legislation to implement the government's entire 7-year personal income tax scheme. Already today at the National Press Club, the Treasurer refused to say what the year-by-year cost of that scheme is because he said those costings were unreliable. If the Treasurer won't say what the year-by-year cost of the scheme is, and he also says the costing is unreliable, how can the Treasurer ask the parliament to vote for it?
The Treasurer has the call.
Mr Speaker, the Shadow Treasurer can try and be as tricky and shifty as the Leader of the Opposition with his smarmy approach to tax policy, Mr Speaker. But, Mr Speaker, the answer is simple. The cost of the measure is $140 billion over the next 10 years, which is more than twice that
which is more than twice the relief that has been provided to companies under our enterprise tax plan, Mr Speaker. We are putting the priority on ensuring that tax relief is provided to those on low and middle incomes, and that cost, as I said, is $13.4 billion over the forward estimates, $140 billion over the next 10 years, Mr Speaker. If the opposition wants to deny Australians lower taxes, then they should just be honest about it. They shouldn't come in here looking for excuses, Mr Speaker. They will look for any excuse not to reduce taxes for Australian. The bill's on the table. Vote for it or oppose it. Whichever way you do it, Australian people, when you know where you sit on tax, and where they sit on tax is higher taxes under Labor, lower taxes under Liberal and National Party, and you're making that very clear to the Australian people.
The member for Wide Bay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. Will the Deputy Prime Minister update the House on recent announcements of nation-building, job-creating regional infrastructure, including in my electorate of Wide Bay? Is the Deputy Prime Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I do thank the member for Wide Bay for his question, and I thank him for his advocacy for his electorate, for Queensland and in the national interest, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, on April 23, I stood with the member for Wide Bay and the member for Hinkler, the Assistant Minister, Mr Speaker, at a very emotional press conference where we announced funding for Section D of the Bruce Highway. And as I was standing behind the member for Wide Bay as he was speaking to the press, Mr Speaker, he became quite emotional. He was a policeman for 16 years and a very fine policeman with the Queensland State Police Force, Mr Speaker. And on many occasions he'd had to go and do the 3 a.m. death knock, Mr Speaker, not something any police officer wants to do, to tell families that their relatives, their loved ones, were not coming home. And sometimes those families had lost their lives on that particular section of road, that 26-kilometre stretch of road that is now going to be duplicated, Mr Speaker, as part of the Bruce Highway upgrade. Cooroy to Curra, Mr Speaker, an $800 million commitment, Mr Speaker, a 4-lane ring road around Gympie, Mr Speaker. Greater safety, reduced travel times, getting people home sooner and safer. And that's what the infrastructure spend is all about. The infrastructure spend in last night's budget, Mr Speaker, for the Bruce Highway, the commitment is now up to $10 billion, boosting productivity, creating local jobs, whilst at the same time increasing road safety. And can I also commend the editor of the Gympie Times, Shelley Strawn, for her advocacy, and she very well put it on the front page of her newspaper under the bold headlines, "We did it." We did it, she says, in conjunction with the member for Wide Bay. And this followed on from another very graphic front page entitled "Stop the Carnage." The final leg of the Bruce Highway bypass must be built now. I know how much this means to the member for Wide Bay, but more importantly, Mr Speaker, to the people he represents. And that's what politics is all about. It's not just about the government or this parliament, it's about the people we serve. And the sooner some members remember that, Mr Speaker, the better off we'll all be, Mr Speaker. And I can hear them yell out, and I don't know why, because this is about saving people's lives. Saving people's lives. That's what I'm talking about, and I don't know why you're yelling. That's why the infrastructure—
The member for McEwen is warned.
And he should be warned, Mr Speaker. That's what this is about.
The Deputy Prime Minister will resume his seat. The member for Grainler on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, on a point of order, there was no yelling out from this side of the House. None.
The member for Grainler—
That's why we did aid.
The member for Grainler can resume his seat. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The member for McEwen will leave under 94A. The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I was talking about road safety, just like I was yesterday, Mr Speaker. That's what the road infrastructure spend is all about. In last night's budget and going forward over the next 10 years, the pipeline of investment that this government is putting into place to help people get home sooner and safer, just like Section D of the Bruce Highway, Mr Speaker.
The Minister has indicated he wishes to raise a point of order. The Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. During the course
of the Deputy Prime Minister's answer then, the member for Cowan made an unparliamentary remark in relation to the police service for the member for Wide Bay, and I would ask you to ask her to withdraw it. It was laughed at by the Leader of the Opposition, who turned and smirked to her, and she should withdraw it.
The Minister will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business will resume his seat. Manager of Opposition Business will resume his seat. It's a clear process I need to follow in these circumstances. I didn't hear anything. Obviously, there's a lot of voices coming at me. I didn't hear anything. We operate a system here where I simply ask the member whether they made an unparliamentary remark, and I just ask the member for Cowan whether the Minister will not interject while I'm addressing the chamber, or he won't be here to hear the outcome.
Not make any unparliamentary remarks.
I thank the member for Cowan. The Leader of the Opposition has the call.
My question is to the Prime Minister. The Treasurer has just provided the 10-year cost of the personal income tax scheme. Can the government now provide the total cost of corporate tax cuts over the same 10-year period, both legislated and proposed to be legislated by this government? And if the government cannot provide the 10-year cost, why not?
The Treasurer has the call.
Mr Speaker, I'm sorry to have to provide the Leader of the Opposition with a lecture on how budgets work, Mr Speaker, but the measure that is before the Senate is the unlegislated measure for which we've made it very clear what the 10-year costing is. The measure that he now refers to is a measure in this year's budget, and I've indicated the 10-year cost for that. That's the way the budgets are done.
Treasurer will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yes, it's on direct relevance. Both the Treasurer and before him the Prime Minister have deliberately picked an earlier figure, start date for 10 years, on their corporate tax, but they keep pretending that we're not asking on the 1st of July 2018. Just answer the question.
The Treasurer has the call.
It's pretty simple. There's a measure before the Senate. Okay? It's based on a previous year's budget. Okay? It's 10 years, and you have a 10-year cost for the unlegislated measure in the Senate. And, Mr Speaker, the 10-year cost for that is clear. The 10-year cost that they've asked about the personal income tax plan was in the budget, and there's a 10-year cost for that. Heaven forbid you ever got into government and had to manage the nation's finances.
The member for McKellar has the call.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Health. Will the minister outline to the House how a stronger economy enables the government to deliver record investment in world-leading medical research that will develop life-saving medical breakthroughs and create tens of thousands of jobs?
The Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for McKellar, who's been a great advocate for the biomedical sector and the pharmaceutical sector, which has a very significant base within his electorate. One of the things that he has often pointed out is that you can only deliver life-saving medicines, you can only deliver growth in hospitals funding, growth in Medicare funding, growth in mental health funding, if you have a strong economy, if you have the basis for a stable economy which will deliver better results for those in work and better results so as the government can ensure proper investment. Now, as part of that, what we have seen is that this government has been able to secure Medicare and hospital funding, mental health funding and the PBS, as we discussed yesterday, with the investment in Spinraza and the comparison with those who came before us who denied access to fundamental medicines. But what we did last night, we didn't just invest in life-saving medicines, but we invested in a new medical industry in Australia. As part of a $6 billion medical research funding package over the coming 4 years, there was at the heart a $1.3 billion medical and health sector industry growth plan. That included $240 million for new frontier science research, $248 million for rare cancers and rare diseases clinical trials. This will give access to new medicines to those who could never have otherwise have had that possibility. But at the heart of this new hub, this new funding plan, is a $500 million 10-year national genomics plan, That's about delivering precision medicine to 200,000 Australians and more. It's about giving them access to genetic testing. It's about building the research capability and making Australia a global destination for the new wave of medical treatment, medical research and all of the jobs which come with it. So the two things that we want to create: better health outcomes for over 200,000 Australians, and over, on the best estimates we have, 200 new companies to be created and tens of thousands of jobs come together in this one initiative. The first step we will take, though, as part of this, was outlined by the Treasurer today. It will be the creation of Mackenzie's mission, and this is a $20 million plan to help 10,000 families access preconception genetic testing and screening for conditions such as cystic fibrosis, SMA and Fragile X. It means that fewer children are likely to be born with these conditions in the future. That is the outcome of a budget built on a strong economy.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. Today the government has refused to say the total 10-year cost of corporate tax handouts from the 1st of July 2018. It has refused to say the separate cost of all three steps of its personal income tax scheme and refused to provide the year-by-year cost of its 7-year income tax scheme. Is it that the government doesn't know what these numbers are, or that it's simply refusing to provide the answer?
The Treasurer.
Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition may be very used to changing the rules to suit himself and the union movement in the Labor Party, Mr Speaker, but this is what the former Finance Minister said in the government of which he formed a part. This was Penny Wong on the ABC in 2012. We don't release 10-year costings. The Treasurer, Wayne Swan, stood at the same National Press Club and talked about 10-year projections being unreliable, and he said to Radio National to Fran Quelly on the 20th of March 2012, we don't do those 10-year estimates. Mr Speaker, it's always one rule for the Labor Party and one rule for everybody else. One rule for their union mates, one rule for everybody else, Mr Speaker. You can't change the rules.
The Treasurer needs to withdraw that last remark.
I withdraw, Mr Speaker.
Has the Treasurer concluded his answer? The member for Murray.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. Will the minister update the House on steps the government has taken in the budget to protect Australian travellers?
The Minister for Home Affairs has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question, for the work that he does in his electorate to keep his constituents safe, the support he provides, like all of us in this parliament provide to the Australian Federal Police, to ASIO, to the other agencies who work day and night, Mr Speaker, to keep Australians safe. And we know that it's an uncertain world. We've seen attacks at airports in Europe, elsewhere around the world, and we know that air travellers do face a risk, whether it's in this country or elsewhere around the world. In fact, in July of last year, Mr Speaker, there was a flight, an A380 leaving Sydney, an Etihad flight bound for the Middle East, where a person or persons attempted to smuggle an explosive device onto that A380. Now, had that been successful, Mr Speaker, it would have of course been catastrophic. It would have been the biggest aviation disaster since 9/11. It would have had all sorts of consequences for the economy, for the tourism industry, not to speak obviously of the human cost. Now, we had a look at security settings at our domestic airports as a result, Mr Speaker, and we've been working very closely with the owners of the airports, with the airlines, with other stakeholders, and I'm pleased to say that last night the Treasurer announced in the budget that we have committed $294 million to enhance our security at domestic airports, at regional airports as well as the major airports. We will work with those regional providers and provide capital support to help put in place new best technology of X-ray. We will have additional efforts in relation to the Australian Federal Police counter-terrorist first response presence at airports. We will work with all of the intelligence agencies to make sure, Mr Speaker, that we can do whatever is within our power to keep Australians safe. We have a continent where people travel freely each day and expect to travel in safety. But we also know that the authorities in this country have thwarted now 14 attempts at mass casualty events, and we know that there are people within our own country who would seek to do harm to Australians tomorrow, whether it's at an airport, a place of mass gathering, at a school, a food court, in a shopping centre, wherever it might be. This threat is not diminishing, and the government remains absolutely committed. And we demonstrated again last night through the measures that we've taken to provide budget savings so that we can manage the budget effectively to pay for these essential services, to guarantee, Mr Speaker, these essential services so that we can provide every effort to the police, to the law enforcement, to the intelligence agencies to keep Australians safe.
The member for McMahon.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How can the Treasurer expect this parliament to support policies when the Treasurer either doesn't know or won't say how much those policies will cost?
The Treasurer has the call.
Costs $140 billion. It's $13.4 billion over the forward estimates. The measure is laid out very, very clearly. If you don't want to support it, don't support it. But go out of this place. Go out of this place, I say to the Shadow Treasurer. Look all of those 10 million Australians in the eye and say no tax relief for you, because that's what the Shadow Treasurer is doing here, Mr Speaker. We have been very clear today. We've been very clear. And we've provided more level of detail on the cost of this measure than those opposite ever provided in opposition. The former Treasurer, the member for Lily's giggling and smiling up there because he knows what I'm saying is true. He never provided it, Mr Speaker, but we have provided it. The cost is $140 billion. When we came forward with the enterprise tax plan, we said what the 10-year cost was there too, Mr Speaker. We've said today very plainly what the cost of the unlegislated measure is in the Senate over 10 years, Mr Speaker, which is $35.6 billion, and its peak cost on the 10th year it is $9.8 billion, Mr Speaker. So, the government has no plan to reverse the enterprise tax plan. That is not part of the government's policy, and as a result the government doesn't go around costing policies that it's not going to do. The only people who have a plan to reverse all of the enterprise tax plan is the Labor Party. So if that's your policy, you cost it, and then you go and tell the Australian people you're going to jack up their taxes, because that's what you plan to do, because you have to, because you've already spent the money. You spent it all at the last election. They spent all the money on the increased negative gearing, on the capital gains tax, on the higher personal tax rate for the top marginal rate, on everything on reversing the enterprise tax plan, including $25 billion already for tax relief for small and medium-sized businesses, which they can't wait to rip away from those small and medium-sized businesses, Mr Speaker. The Labor Party has a plan on tax to suffocate the Australian economy, Mr Speaker, and the Liberal Party and the National Party has a plan to give that economy the relief it needs to grow for a stronger economy, to guarantee the essential services that Australia rely on, to create more jobs, Mr Speaker, and for the government to live within its means.
The member for Robertson has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and my question is to the Minister for Aged Care. Will the minister update the House on how the government is increasing support to older Australians, including over 30,000 people aged 65 years and over who live in my electorate of Robertson? How is the government acting to ensure that older Australians have more choices for a longer life?
The Minister for Aged Care.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for Robinson for her ongoing interest in ageing Australians in her electorate and the representation that she makes. Last night's budget, the Treasurer announced a record $5 billion spend of additional money for aged care and senior Australians, a total of 20,000 new high-level care places since last year's budget, and 13,500 new residential care places, along with 775 restorative care places for those who have need of them. In addition to that, we've listened to people on the ground who've talked about the need for face-to-face interaction, so we will be putting into place aged care navigators who will assist people in hubs across the regions where it is absolutely important. We're looking at simpler forms. We're looking at upgrading My Aged Care, which has created challenges in the past. We're streamlining the assessment for aged care services so that Australians have a timely assessment that gives them the opportunity of making decisions and choices. But on top of that, what we've done is we've focused on a mental health need in aged care. People over the age of, particularly men over the age of 85, have the highest suicide rates. They are extremely concerning. So what we're doing is we are putting $82.5 million into mental health in aged care, residential aged care. $20 million will be provided to mental health nurses to help older Australians who live alone and who need the level of support and intervention to ensure that they are given an opportunity to make the right choices around the life that they take. Suicides in older Australians is not something that any of us should ignore. There will be $32.8 million for palliative care in residential care, which is an initiative that is absolutely important in ensuring that quality of life is provided to those living in those facilities. $22.9 million for physical activity tailored to over 65s in partnership with community sporting groups to keep them active, agile and looking after their musculoskeletal frame so that they reduce the level of falls. $5.3 million for dementia innovation, not research but innovation that allows technology and other support mechanisms to be put into place. And finally, health checks at 45 and 65 years of age, which allows people to look at their health status, consider what their options are as they continue into that ageing continuum towards 100, but equally the economic and financial planning that they need to make in terms of both their ageing and their time within residential care. This government is looking after senior Australians and I acknowledge the work that we've done.
The Prime Minister.
I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
I thank the Prime Minister.